on you. Okay, well, welcome everybody to today's podcast. It's an absolute pleasure, as always, to introduce one of our very special guests. And I've done a little bit of research on you, Mr. Sethi. You are an award-winning podcaster and radio presenter. You host one of Europe's top podcasts, and you are the organizer of a podcast festival. What a great CV for somebody to talk about podcasts. I have one problem though, one little question mark over some of the stuff that I've looked at. It says on some of your profiles that you're a Liverpool FC supporter. What's going on, mate?
Well, you know, world champions, European, Super Cup. I mean, what can I say? You know, you've got to run with the best to be the best.
I see. Okay. No, did they do a 7-0 or something the other day, or 7 goals?
Yeah, we have to give everyone a chance occasionally.
Okay, well done. Just to sort of ground you a little bit there, buddy. Okay, so so it's an absolute pleasure to see you, Sam. Thanks for giving us your time.
Okay.
And you know, so we're talking about podcasts today. We're talking about people who perhaps are looking into starting up podcasts. But before we actually do, I was, again, looking at some statistics. 7.1 million people in the UK listen to a podcast every week. And that is up 24% in the last 12 months. Why is this? What's going on? Why are we changing the habits to how we listen and take information or entertainment? What's going on there, do you think?
It's the same with Netflix. It's the same with many things we do now. People want to time shift their listening. They want to listen to what they want to listen to at the time they want to listen to it. I think live radio, live TV has its place. I mean, sport and the excitement and the adrenaline. Same with radio, the interactivity. But I think many people now, you know, want to fit the value they get from podcasting can be multiple genres, but they want to fit it in when they're walking the dog, driving to the office, doing whatever they want to do. So I think on demand is growing massively.
Yeah. So it is that convenience, but then there's an opportunity as well, because it is, I guess, a relatively new sort of format or platform to get content out on, and along with that, there are opportunities because it's a relatively cheap and doable platform for most of us. So if we're thinking then of starting a podcast, we've got an idea perhaps. What's the way forward? How do we go about it? Is it just simple, or is there a much more complicated structure to this? How should we go about it?
Okay, so you'll hear me say an expression very often. It's called go ugly early. Just get on with it. Stop procrastinating about the perfect podcast. Guess what? Your first episode might have you, your mum, your dad, and 2 cats listening, if you're lucky. Just do what you want to do. Find your passion. Find a subject that you know something about. Because the one thing you'll find is that, as we talk through this session, is I spend more time editing and distributing my podcast than I do creating it. And that passion to sit down and then to edit the podcast, get it right, then spend the time pushing it out to all the social medias and then trying to get people to listen to it. If you haven't got a passion for what you're doing in the first place, the average, I think, is 7 podcasts, and then most people abandon ship. So my first port of call is start off with something that you're passionate about. Most of you know, your friends will tell you, oh, you know what, Patrick's massive on hairstyles, that's his passion. If you start a podcast on different beards, whatever it may be. But as long as you find a passion and you start with it, it will come across in your voice as well.
Do you think it's worth doing some research into whatever your passion is? So, maybe it is Patrick with his beards. Is it worth doing some research on keywords? What are people searching for on Google? What is causing a stir to see if there's an actual audience for that? Or do you think even if you're very niche, you'll there is an audience worldwide, I guess, because those figures I gave at the beginning at the top there were just the UK. Worldwide, it must be, massive. If I'd have done my research better, I'd have been able to tell you, but couldn't be bothered.
Yeah, I mean, worldwide, there are over 1 million podcasts, right? And the number is growing. You could have a podcast on crocheting and you will get an audience. There is an audience out there for everything. The challenge is finding your audience. Kevin Kelly, talks about finding your 1,000 true fans, or that if you can eventually get to, if you can imagine building a business around this, is finding your 1,000 true fans who will pay you £10 a month. There's £100,000 business, right? But you can't get to that day one. So you need to work your way back. And yeah, step one, do some research, find out if there's other podcasts similar to the one you want to do. Are they successful? How are they successful? I certainly fundamentally recommend, if you do find podcasts similar to the ones you want to create, go and listen to their style. Is it a style that you could adapt?
Okay, yeah. So there's a massive audience out there. Basically, is the answer to that. So okay, so we've got a passion in something, whatever it might be. What's the first steps then? Do we need to structure it? Do we need to write a script? Do we just talk? Do we need to interview people? What's the format here? Is there one?
Yeah, I think you need a format. I think you need a small structure. I don't think you need to script it, because it comes across as scripted. Hello, good morning, I'm reading a script. It's not natural. You've got to. What podcasting is this beautiful intimacy of you. It's the ultimate threesome, right? It's you, your guest, and one other person in their ears listening to you. That's all you've got to think of. It's no more. You might have, if you're lucky, thousands of people listening, or hundreds, or millions, if you're Joe Rogan. But actually, it's just three people: you, your guest, and one other person listening intimately in their ears to you. And that is by permission. They've given you their permission to do that. And so, again, I think with podcasting, don't script it, make it natural. You will come across better. And I do have a structure. In my structure, because mine's a business and technology podcast, I have what they do presently, then what they did in the past, and then I give them a platform to talk about what they want to do in the future. And so it gives me a little bit of a guideline as well. Hi, Brian, good morning. How are you? Tell me what you're up to today. How did you get into this past? What are you going to be doing next, Brian? Future. Thank you very much. And there is some structure to it, but it's not rigid.
Yeah, it's interesting what you were saying there about, actually it's a really intimate kind of media, because especially because so many people wear headphones on trains, whether they're going for a walk or a run or whatever it might be. And if you've ever listened, and everybody surely has, listened to music, it is like it's in your head. It's not like you're just hearing something on the other side of the room, like the TV. It's literally in your head. And of course, being really interested myself in the performance side of what we do as presenters and speakers, I think people can hear the slightest bit of false energy, the false performance, as you said, hi everybody, welcome. You just can't get away with that. You look like Barry Scott off the Sillet Bang ad or something like that. And I'm not knocking Barry Scott off the Sillet Bang ad, by the way. I mean, he paid to do a job and he does it very well. But that's not going to work on a podcast. So do you think you have to have, therefore, a certain amount of confidence in yourself because it's intimate, you are sort of in a way exposing yourself, your innermost thoughts, if we're going to get really arty-farty and la-di-da, you're exposing your soul in a way of what your thoughts and opinions and ideas are.
As long as you've got a subject matter knowledge, then you're fine. Okay. If I started talking about horse riding or cooking, I would be exposed instantly as a charlatan and not knowing what I'm doing. I would just be a talking head, and that's not what I want. A podcast is, for me, something that you know about, that you want to share with other people, who then want to learn from you and hear what you have to say. It doesn't have to be with a guest. It could be a one-on-one podcast. You might just be one-to-one with somebody. But I would say that, looking at the podcast itself, the thing I always label up in my room, I used to be a professional presenter for Microsoft. So in my day, I used to be, the guy who would come on stage and say, hello, welcome, Ali Pally. This is Microsoft Office X or Windows 95 or whatever. And one friend who was a presenter told me two tricks. One was put the word energy and entertainment next to what you're doing certainly when I'm podcasting. You've got to remember, this is also an entertainment medium. The person listening to you is giving you actually not only permission to be in their ears, but permission to spend time with you, and don't waste their time. Don't. I hate podcasters who, oh, hello, let's talk about my week. It's been wonderful. I'm great. I'm lovely. It doesn't matter. I don't care. That's not what I'm here to listen to. So don't waste people's time. Be polite in the permission they've given you, but also be energized. Have that energy level. And so I always say just 1 second or 2 seconds. It's super cheesy as well, but I always say to myself, it's showtime.
Yeah. I mean,
It just changes my persona.
just to play devil's advocate here a little bit, Sam, because I actually agree with you. I really dislike that. Oh yeah, no, I went. I was down the road the other day and I saw John and all of that, and it's not my cup of tea. But there may be a place for it amongst different people. People might like that. Certainly if you're a celebrity, perhaps. Do you think?
If you're a celebrity, but we aren't, most of us, and the minutiae of my life is not really the exciting part of why I hope people come to my podcast. I think what they want to do with me, it certainly is listen to the guest,
Yeah.
listen to any intelligent conversation I can have with my guest, and learn and go away happier, wiser, and having spent the time.
Yeah, but I think, personally, I think it would be a struggle if you didn't have guests on a podcast. That's my view, anyway. Just from even doing this, I've been doing these sort of webinars for maybe 8 months now. Is it something like that? And I started off the first month with me just talking, which was fine because having experience in TV presenting and video presenting and training people and giving ideas and stuff like that. And I was probably okay for the first 6 weeks. And then I was just like, oh my God, what am I going to talk about now? So that's when you start then getting in guests. So, I mean, I can hardly imagine something, unless it's something like current affairs, where you would have the content to just be on your own, do you think? Or am I missing something?
No, I do a daily podcast, a 5-minute daily podcast of a roundup of the day's news in the technology and business space, and that doesn't require a guest, and that is literally me talking, about what's going on. But equally, in that, I have to put a music bed underneath my podcast when I'm on my own, because it just sounds very echoey and isolated. So I agree that. I wouldn't start a podcast that way. Put it that way. I would never start a podcast as a solo podcaster. I would always try and get a guest, because that bouncing and interaction and energy of somebody is always what's entertaining.
Okay, so having guests then seems to be a good idea, especially when we first start.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any knack to the interviewing on a podcast? I mean, you've already mentioned the past, present, and future, but is there a way of sort of delving beyond the obvious sort of questions? Perhaps do we take risks? Do we sort of try and create a bit of sensationalism or something? You mentioned entertainment, or do we just sort of stick to the bog standard questions, write out 10 questions and ask them? What do you think?
I interview people sometimes, having researched them. I know they've got something in their past that they probably don't want to talk about. And my goal is not to catch them out, upset them, trick them. I don't believe in it. Simon Sinek has a book called Find Your Why. Okay. And in that book, it helps you define your purpose. And my purpose for my podcast is to share my platform so others can share their voice. And mine is not to trick you, to catch you out. And so if that's my goal and that's my purpose for why I do it, then with my guests, it's very much a case of tell me the story. Now, I interviewed Monty Panesar last week, and his opening line to me was, I want to be the Piers Morgan, the Indian Piers Morgan. And I face planted. I was like, why? Why would you ever want to be Piers Morgan? But why would you want to be the Indian? And he felt, or he believed, that being controversial, like Katie Price or anybody else like that, was the way to get attention. And maybe he's right, maybe I'm wrong, but I know from a fact that he will probably have a very short term view on podcasting, because he'll end up burning his bridges.
Mhm.
Uh, so no, look, for most of us, we're not celebrities, we're not professionals trying to make, that sort of level. Starting out your podcast, start out with a genuine purpose, a reason to do it, a passion. Find people that you think are interesting, and get going. And as I said, go ugly early.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so maybe we have an idea of what we're going to talk about, what the content is, and who the guest might be. Talking about guests, by the way, any tips on how to get them? I mean, where do we get guests from for our podcast? Do we have to rely on our immediate circle of contacts, or do we just ask people?
It's both, actually, Brian. When I started podcasting, and I wasn't sure, and I'll be brutally honest, if anyone listens to my first two or three podcasts, they're car crash. They're a total car crash. Didn't know my structure. I didn't know what I was doing. So having a friendly friend as your first podcast guest means that you're less nervous. Um, and so I had three or four friends that I started out doing podcasts with, learnt the ropes, started to get better at it, understood what the structure and the timing required was. And then I asked them to give me guest recommendations. That was one way of doing it. But because I do a business and technology show, I look in the press, I look on, the spaces that I read, and I just ask. It's amazing. Just ask people sometimes for help. Ask people to be a guest, and you'll be surprised. 9 times out of 10, they say yes.
Yeah. Oh, super.
No one's going anywhere, by the way. We're all at home for COVID, so they've got to do something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How's your cough, by the way?
What?
How's your cough, by the way? Are you all right?
No, I think I've gone deaf. It's COVID deaf. Go on. I'm okay. I'm fine.
Okay, so all right, so we've got something to talk about. We've got
Yeah.
an idea of what it's going to be and how to get some guests on it. What's the next step? How do we go forward with this, Sam?
Okay, so you need to find a podcasting host. There are multiples out there. Simplecast, Buzzsprout. You know, none of them are special. They're all the same. So just pick one on price if that's what you know. Um, Once you've found your podcasting host, then you basically have to go and find some artwork, a graphic for your podcast. Now, I recommend going to somewhere like Fiverr.com. That will give you a really simple graphic designer who can come and create a nice podcast cover for you. Um, there's a trick that you have to have, and please note this: the podcast cover has to be 1400 pixels by 1400 pixels. Um,
Is that
if
standard
it
across all platforms?
No, it's standard on Apple, and then everyone copies Apple. So
Okay.
if your podcast cover graphic is smaller or larger, Apple won't allow you to do your podcast. They won't accept it.
Wow.
So you have to have that graphic at 1400 by 1400. Once you've got that graphic and you've come up with it, now there's two styles of graphic out there. One is the just pure words. Mine is just Sam Talks Technology. That's it. Very simple. It's clean. Or there's if you go onto iTunes or Apple iTunes, you can see there's people who put their faces. They're trying to sell the brand of themselves. And so if you think you're comfortable with being your brand and the brand front, then put your face up front. And if you're not sure right now, just put some words. But if you go and look on iTunes at the massive podcasts there, and you go to the segment that you think you're going to start your podcast in, have a look what everyone else has done before you and say, do I want to be the same as everyone else because that's the standard, or do I want to stand out somehow and be different? Again, that's a branding thing, and we haven't got time to do a full branding course, but you have to go and get that done. Once you've got that done, um, then you've got to get your basic equipment. And I don't know if you want to talk about that in a second, but
Mm.
you need to record 2 podcasts. One is a 5-minute intro podcast telling everyone what your podcast is going to be about, and that is a solo podcast. So, hello, my name's Sethi. I'm going to be talking about business and technology. Please join me every week on a Wednesday, blah, blah, blah. That's the sort of podcast. That's your intro podcast that you will upload. And then you want to do your first podcast. And what you'll get from your podcasting host, which is where you will upload those podcasts to, is a RSS feed. It's just a file, and you will upload that into Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Google, Stitcher. There's 100 different places you can actually upload your podcast to. And you'll be walked through and talked through by whatever podcasting host you use. They generally are pretty good now on, step 1, do this, step 2, do that. And you can follow it. You don't have to be technical. It's a non-technical challenge. And then once Apple's approved your podcast and Spotify, then your second, your third, your fourth podcast will automatically be put up there.
Okay. So we can find the platform to actually host our podcast. You mentioned equipment. How important is the quality of your equipment? Can you just use the mic on your phone, or do you need to invest a little bit, do you think?
Your first ever podcast, if you want to do a test one, you can use a standard pair of Apple cheap iPhones. Just do it. Don't invest in anything. Make sure you just do a podcast. As I said, go ugly early. Get your iPhone. There's a product called Anchor FM from Spotify. It's on your phone, hit record, and record a podcast. If you don't even want to Anchor FM on your iPhone, and I'm sure there's on your Android, there's a recording app. Just go to the recording app, hit record, and record a podcast. Hear what your voice sounds like. And by the way, we all hate our voices. When you first hear your voice, we all hate it. Oh my God, I didn't realize I sounded like that. I thought I sounded like something else in my head. And now you hear your voice for the first time. Actually, after a period of time, you actually settle into your own voice and you quite like it again. But it is a shock. So you can just do a simple record with your, the Apple record function or Anchor FM, and that's your first podcast. And just get it out there, and then try and listen back to it, and then go, okay, I could have done better there. Have I got a structure? Eventually, 100% you need to invest into a decent mic. This is a Rode Podcaster mic from Rode, RODE. It's a USB mic.
I've got one too.
That's the newer version. Mine's the older version. So Brian's got the newer one there. That's called the NT1, and it's a great mic. It's got a pop filter on it. It adds bass to it. It's got all the great little things that make your voice sound a little bit deeper, better, cleaner, fresher, whatever it may be. Outside of that, you don't need anything. This is being recorded, so you need a Zoom account. You send a link to your guest, and guess what? You record it, download the MP3 file, and upload that into your podcasting host, and you pretty much are off and running.
Yeah, that's super. I just noticed that there's a link there actually in the chat. If anybody's interested in getting some of the equipment that Sam was talking about there, it's a page on our website where it's just got some little links. It takes you through to Amazon. If you want to get it, that's fine. But it's in the chat now. Just thought I'd mention that. So as you go forward, then you will need to invest a little bit. Do you need like soundproofing and stuff like that? I hear these stories, and we've all done it, who've been presenting for a while, sitting under the duvet, trying to get that nice sort of echo-free sound quality. Are there any other ways we can do that if we have got a room that's a bit echoey?
Okay, so the first one is never do your podcast in your bathroom. That's the most echoey room. But yeah, a small room clearly will benefit you better than a big echoey room. No one's going to put soundproofing in. I mean, maybe you will in the distant future when you're much more established, but soundproofing is not going to happen. So a small room's great. Headphones for you and your guest are always good. Don't let your guest on the other end just play back your voice through their speakers. It will become echoey in the record. So both of you with headphones, if you can get your guest to also have a good mic, that's great. Now I use one other little free tool. It's called crisp.ai, which begins with a K, not a C. And crisp.ai is free. And what it does is it knocks out for you using AI all the background noise. So I'm using it right now, and it's basically, yeah, it's on, it's turned on. And so now what it's doing is using AI to basically filter out all the background noise for me.
Will that, because Madison's actually, funnily enough, just asked that question, will that actually work on your guest as well?
Yeah, if you can ask your guest to use Crisp AI, it'll work as well for
Oh,
them.
I see. So you both have to be running that program.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it improves my side of the conversation, but if they can have it as well, then it improves their side of the conversation. As it's free, then hopefully they will not mind installing it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Super. Super. So we've got a decent sound now. We're not echoey. We've got crisp AI. We've got something to talk about. What's the next step? Where do we go from there?
Um, well, the next step really is you can, and I recommend starting to do it, get a pre-roll and post-roll. Let me explain that. So a pre-roll is like a nice little jingle that comes in on your show. You can get that done on Fiverr as well. And really what you want it to be is really short. The intro needs to be short. You know, mine is, hello, welcome to, it's done by a female. And I often juxtapose, if I'm a male, actually having a female voice is more interesting. And then if you're a female, having a male intro, it doesn't always have to be, but that's how I like it. So I have a female voice that introduced me. Welcome to Sam's Technology Show, blah, blah, blah. It's about, I don't know, it's not even 30 seconds. It's about 10 seconds, the intro. But the more important one is your out roll. That is the call to action. So on my out roll, before I go, I always tell my guest, or I always tell my audience, sorry, who my next guest is going to be. And then my out roll is, thank you for listening to Sam Talks Technology. You can find more about Sam's podcast on my website. You know, obviously I'd say the website, or you can find us on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you find your podcasts. And again, make it a call to action. So don't just sort of finish your podcast and go, thanks. So intros and outros are quite key. And then once you've got your podcast, yeah, start to build up a list of subjects and audience guests that you're going to invite.
So with the podcast, like, you know, on YouTube, you're asking people to subscribe if you have a YouTube channel. With the podcast, what are you actually asking them to do? Are you asking them to, because otherwise, if they're already there, what do you need them to do?
So there's a subscribe button on every endpoint distribution. So whether it's Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, iHeart, the list goes on. What you're asking them to do is not to remember to have to find you each week. What you're doing is saying, subscribe here, and that service, Apple in this case, for example, will deliver my podcast to you, and you will then just have it ready on your phone for when you go for your dog walk, or you're in the car, or at the gym, or wherever you listen to me. And so it's a bit like customer acquisition, okay? The marketing cost to get somebody to listen to your podcast is high. But once they're listening to it, you want to make a call to action to make them a repeat listener. And if you don't make them a repeat listener, guess what? You're just going to have to spend all that time and money and effort again, getting them to remember to listen to your next podcast, and then the one after, and the one after. So, yeah, try and make the call to action. Please subscribe to my podcast.
That just actually reminds me, Sam. If you are watching this for the first time, go to tvtrainingacademy.com, join the members area, and it's free, and you'll see all the information for next week's webinar, and the week after that, and the week. Is that the sort of thing, Sam? Is that what you mean?
Absolutely, Brian. Well done.
Great stuff. Okay, so the simply question is now then, what next? Where do we go from here?
Okay, so now you've produced your podcast. One question everyone asks is, how long's a podcast? And the answer back is, how long's a piece of string? I interviewed somebody called Charlie Cadbury last week about a brilliant product he launched, but it was very tight. It was a 25-minute podcast. We didn't need to waffle. I interviewed a wonderful lady called Kate Bradley, who's amazing, from a product called Lately.ai, and I'll talk about that product later on in this session. She's an energy ball. She's amazing. But that was an hour 15. I could have talked to her for 2 hours. In fact, I did yesterday. I did an interview with the chairman of BT for 2 hours, just because we had so much to talk about. There is no, what I'm trying to say, there is no set length, right? Do it because it's enjoyable. Do it because the audience you think are going to enjoy what you're talking about, and stop it when you think it's got waffly and boring.
Yeah, that's great. It's the same as when you're doing TV or something like that. If you're finding it fascinating and interesting, then pursue it and carry on. But if it's actually getting a bit dull for yourself, then just trust your own your gut and your curiosity. What are you interested in, and go with that. And then I guess you will attract the right fan base, because they're the sort of people who just get you because you're being honest and you're doing it your way. So
Well,
yeah.
Joe Rogan is 4 hours, right? And
Yeah.
everyone says you shouldn't do it long. Everyone's standard answer is, "Oh, your podcast should be as long as the commute to work or the drive," right? It's as long as it's interesting. Is my answer.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose the big question is, I mean, we've been doing our podcasts for 6 months, and we're building our fan base, and we're getting an audience of something that's starting to look respectable towards our 1,000, perhaps. How do we monetize that? I mean, what's a good? Because what's going to happen, I would imagine, is if you've been doing a podcast for 6 months or a year or whatever it is, and you've got 1,000 people, and then you suddenly go, okay, it's now £10 a month, you'll be back to square one. You'll be back with 10 people. So is there a set way to do it? Is there a pattern?
We're getting into monetization much earlier than I thought, but yeah, there are numbers of ways of monetizing your podcast.
Okay.
I never believe
that, Sam. If there's a few more steps before we get there, we can come back to that. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I would say before you even get to that point of consideration for monetization and growth, I think you need to look at how you edit your podcast and how you distribute your podcast.
Okay. So you don't just record it on your phone for half an hour or whatever it is and bung up the whole file. You've got to edit it.
Look, if you're a brilliant presenter and your guest is a brilliant guest and you don't feel you need to edit it, congratulations. But most of us have a voice tick. Now, you may not know your voice tick yet, but you will find your voice tick. Oops, sorry. Yeah, my voice level's dropped. I'm on a beta version of Mac, and it drops it automatically. Thank you, whoever said that.
Ah.
I was watching it. I've got it here. Don't ever load beta software. That's my other tip. Okay, so most people have a voice tick, and that's a problem. Not because I think it's a problem for them. Look, I'm doing it now. You knows, it's great if you're just having a natural conversation. It doesn't, you sort of avoid it, that's happening. But as I said at the beginning, you've been given permission by somebody to listen to them, and that you're in their ears. And I personally hate that sort of waffle, so I cut it out. And now, when I first started, there's a free tool called Audacity. It's available on Mac and Windows, and it gives you the WAV files. You upload the MP3, you've got the WAV file, and you can go in and you can try and work out somewhere in between. But I call that editing in the dark. You have no real idea what you're doing. You're just guessing that that's the bit where somebody made the noise, or there was a cough, or whatever it may be. So I use a tool now called Descript. Descript is unbelievable. It changes your podcasting from being an amateur to being a professional. It's life-changing if you're a podcaster.
Gemma's actually just put a link to it in the chat there. So if you want to take a look at that, guys, you can follow that link. But you were telling me about this a little while ago. Now, this is an AI as well, isn't it?
Uses AI, and let me explain why it's important that this product, you should use this product. So you upload your MP3 as you would normally, the recorded podcast, and what it does, it auto transcribes your podcast. So it creates a Word document in effect for your podcast. You can then automatically label the voices. Who's speaking? Is that mine? Is that my guest? So then you label it. But the magic then occurs, which is, literally by just like a Word document, I can cut and paste, I can edit, I can delete, and it does that to the audio for you. So unbelievably, the audio is now just being edited by the AI, just as you're editing the transcription. So I can, with one button in Descript, say, get rid of all the ums, the ahs, the nos, the thers, the word gaps. So anything that's got like more than 1 second or 2 second word gap, crush it. Just remove that gap, remove that word space. And suddenly your podcast is tighter, cleaner, fresher, it sounds better. And then after that, you can go through and delete or remove what I call waffle. So I spend time with my guests at the beginning. You know, if it was you, Brian, or you, Gemma, I might say, hey, how are you? Where are you in the world? What are you doing? You know, I might spend that few minutes getting you comfortable on mic, checking everything's okay. But my podcast that I broadcast, the one that goes out, I cut that all out. As I said, I don't want to spend that waffly time. So Descript allows me just to do a strikeout. And then the next thing after I've done with Descript, editing it, when I export it ready to go to my podcasting host, it does normalization of the soundtrack. So if that's my voice and that's my guest voice, sometimes theirs might be lower or higher than me. And what normalization does is it levels those two sounds out. And what does that mean in English? It means that when I'm listening back to the podcast, one voice doesn't suddenly go high and then I have to turn my iPhone down, and the other voice is low and then I have to turn it back up. And that would just be awful. So normalization allows me to have a consistent sound to the track so that the listener is got a good high quality, but they're not having to play around with their volume.
I got it. So if I run Descript or through this webinar, once I've got the MP3 file, that bit where you suddenly went quiet,
Yes,
identify it and pop it back up.
it would.
Fantastic. And the other thing, just with Descript, I mean, chopping out these little bits. I sometimes see videos on YouTube where you can. It's an obvious bit where they have chopped something out and they're talking, and then they suddenly are over here and they carry on. Is it obvious that it's doing that, or can you not tell?
Descript's pretty clever, actually. It's certainly with the podcast rather than the video cast. With a podcast, it smooths the clip through. So the bit where you take it out, it will actually work out how to smooth it through for you.
Wow.
On the video, yeah, you do have that clippiness if you're not careful. So you just got to be careful how you edit a video. But on a podcast, it's super simple.
Wow.
And the next bit that I love Descript for is that you can take clips of your podcast. So imagine your podcast is an hour and a half long. What you've got to do is you've got to find those bits in your podcast that have high value that you're going to be able to put on social media. So as I'm editing my podcast, I'm highlighting using a marker. Yeah, that's the bit that Brian said. That's the quotable clip I'm going to be able to put onto Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook. And so I can go through and do that. And I can actually take those out and put them in the sidebar and turn those into something called audiograms. And an audiogram is very simply just a little clip, a sound bite of your podcast that you can then push out to social media. So that I was coming to the distribution next, but I'll stick on this for a second. So fundamentally, Descript, you can record everything in it if you wanted to, but I don't. I tend to use Zoom and then bring it in, but that's fine. You certainly edit everything in it. It's brilliant. I highly recommend it. Spend the time looking at the video tutorials. It's really simple as a tool. And then once you've done that, normalizing it out, I think it's great as well. So you've got the whole first part of your editing done, and I think you once you've got doing that several times through, you'll get really polished at it.
And that's going to save you so much time as well if you can get, because these little what did you call them? They were little
Audiograms.
Audiograms. And that's basically like a trailer for a movie where you got all, just whetting people's appetites, giving them a taste of the good bits, and then driving people to subscribe or to go along to your platform. That's basically what they are, yeah?
Yes. Now, distribution is the next part before monetization. Deciding which social media platforms you want to distribute to is critical. I would say Headliner. I'll come back to that one actually, Gemma, as well. But the distribution, because mine's a business technology, I tend to focus on LinkedIn and Twitter. But if you're talking about a consumer-based thing or something else, you might want to be focusing on Facebook and Snapchat, or maybe Instagram, IGTV, or even TikTok. So each one of these platforms has a different audience. You just got to define where you think your audience for your podcast might be living. And it might be on multiple platforms, or it might be just one. That's a decision. Now, if you look at the audiograms, my audiograms are never longer than 2 minutes, 20 seconds long. And the
What is
reason Twitter limits you to 2 minutes, 20 audio. So if you put a 3-minute audiogram, you can't share it onto Twitter. So you might as well make it 2 minutes, 20 at the most, and then you can share that onto any platform pretty much. LinkedIn allows you to share up to 10 minutes of audio, and Facebook, you can share the whole podcast. It has no limit. But you don't want to put your podcast unlimited on to Facebook, because that's not your home. That's not where you want the audience to listen. So I always just put snippets. Now, you can create 5 or 6, maybe 10 snippets in a podcast and push those out regularly throughout the day or through the week to try and get the audience. Nobody's listening to your stream on Twitter constantly. They might dip in and suddenly you're there, and then you see that link back to your full podcast, and that's how you should do it.
So multiple times, sure. So it's like all these different social media platforms are kind of a signpost going, go to my Apple account or go to my whatever host you've got for your podcast. You're just driving people there with a little movie clip, with a little
Teaser. Yeah.
Okay, super. Any other ways we can get?
Yeah, Gemma mentioned it. It's a product I use called Headliner, headliner.app. And Headliner is a great way of putting your cover album to your podcast, if you want to think of it that way. So you can I create a graphic of the guest. I put a title on there. So, it's Brian Naylor, TV extraordinaire, presenter, that's your title, and then I'll put a link back to my podcast from there. And so that sort of gives me a little bit more. And I say this often, we are meerkats. And the reason I say that is when you go down your stream, if there's a graphic moving, a GIF or a bit of vocal movement, we stop, we go, oh, what's that? That looks interesting. And you click on it. So just that little bit of movement in your graphic actually just makes people stop, because they go through so much so quickly.
So that movement just catches people's eyes and makes a difference.
Yeah, I think so.
Super.
Yeah, it's what I find anyway.
Yeah. So that was Headliner. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question there from Leanne. She thought that the distributors were the podcast hosts.
Okay. No. Yes and no. So it depends how you use the word distribution. So your podcast host is distributing your podcast to what I call endpoints. So Buzzsprout, Simplecast, Libsync are your host distributors, and they are pushing your podcast to the endpoints of Apple, Spotify, Google. What I'm talking about in distribution is social media distribution, where your listeners will find more about you. You could call it promotion. If you want to differentiate the word, call it promotion. So that may help. So you're looking at how can I promote my podcast? And that's what the audiograms do. They go to the social media endpoints, and it allows you to then promote your podcast.
Okay, super. We've got a few questions coming in. Shall we sort of deal with those before we go on to monetization? So Susan here is asking about if you've got a couple of audiograms, outro, next podcast. Oh, hold on, that one's disappeared now. Where's Susan?
Hi.
There
Yeah,
you go.
it was just, you may have answered it already, and I was just trying to scribble a few things down. Where you have your outro on your podcast with the sort of
Mhm.
jingle thing, just before, would you say next week we've got such a person, and then perhaps you just stick a couple of audiograms in, just to make them think, oh, I really want to, I want to hear that.
If you've got an audiogram of your guest from next week, brilliant, well done. But
Yeah,
most guests,
I know you'd have to be really well organised to have a
well
load of
organised.
guests interviews lined up.
Yeah,
For your
you would.
podcast, yeah.
I mean, look, the way I do it, I have my guests 6 weeks in advance lined up, so I have 6 weeks future guests. It takes away the stress, because if you're getting to the next week and you still haven't got your guest and you're running, oh my God, who am I going to have?
No,
So I have
yeah.
6 weeks in advance. So
Okay.
in theory, I could ask them to do an audiogram for me, but I don't, because the magic happens in the podcast that you're actually interviewing them on, and that's the audiogram you want. So for me, it's a case of, my guest next week is X, Y, and Z. Please subscribe to my podcast. Thanks for listening. See you soon.
Oh, right. I meant really, magic might not be so sort of up to date, really, but if you had loads in the can, sort of thing,
Yeah,
so you could pick them out beforehand. But
you could do. Yeah,
yeah, it wouldn't be. Maybe you'd lose on topicality then. Okay, cheers.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Susan. I hope that answered it.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. So before we go on to monetization, which is everybody's favourite part, what have we got? Any other questions on what we've spoken about so far? If anybody,
Yeah, there's a load of questions in here.
where?
Brian.
What have we got?
So, Chris
Hi,
is
my
asking.
name's Abdu.
Oh,
Sorry.
we've got Abdu. Where is he?
It's Abu. My camera's off, but I use an Anchor application called Anchor, and once it's uploaded, it automatically uploads it to all other platforms. Is it okay to use that app as well, or what's the best app to use for podcasts or radio uploads?
Anchor's great as an entry point. It works really well. Spotify bought it last year. It will allow you to create once and share many times, but you'll soon find its limitations when you want to go to other platforms that Anchor don't support, or you want to do more to do with your commercialization of your podcast. You'll then have to.
Which one would you say would be the best one to download for free?
I would start with Buzzsprout or Simplecast. They're the two I prefer to start with.
Simplecast and Boss?
Simplecast is the one. Actually, I mean, to be transparent, I use Simplecast, but I have used Buzzsprout in the past. And Andrea is saying something, but I can't hear you. You're muted.
I think your sound's gone down again, Sam.
Oh, has it? This beta thing. There you go. Try that now. Sorry.
Thanks. So Andrea, where's Andrea? Can she?
No, she's saying no. It's fine.
It was just about the sound. But
sorry about
that. Okay. Thanks, Andrea. Cheers. Anybody else then, before we move on, got a question? Just give us a wave, or if you've got something in the chat there. There we go. Chris, there you go. Unmute yourself, Chris, if you can.
Yeah, got me?
Super.
Yeah. It's basically because I remember seeing films like Pump Up the Volume, which probably was the inspiration to everybody's podcast back in the 90s about like a pirate DJ. And one of the things I wanted to be able to do is play all the music without all the censorship. So more wild, naughty, cheeky radio things with other comments and things like that. But then how do I do it with, say, other people's music on it, and then put it on a podcast and transmit it? One, money-wise, in other words, so they get whatever their fair share of whatever else it is, and also legally-wise and things like that, because obviously I'm not making, say, the Rage Against the Machine song where I want all my audience to be singing "Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me," joining in and listening in, which is exactly the kind of thing I want to be able to do. But then again, I never made the Rage Against the Machine song, and obviously, if I'm trying to put lots in it, how would that work? And would you be able to make any money out of it? Because obviously, a large chunk of it is other people's work. So how do you sort of, do that? Almost like, part your own playlist, part your own obviously hosting and DJing.
So it's a copyright. It's a copyright question, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously getting political as well, because I'll be like, right, let's go fight school uniforms. Let's, do all the things you're not allowed to do on normal commercial radio. Put it in, that kind of thing. Oh yeah, like you said, copyright and.
What's happening to Sam? I've lost you, Sam. Is it just me, or has everybody lost him?
I've lost him as well. I think
I lost him.
Oh, you've gone, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, Good Morning Vietnam would be another example. Any of these kind of films where you say, boy, do I wish there was a radio station like that, because all the ones I see are boring.
Sure. Yeah, we got it. We're just worried, but we can't hear Sam now, Chris. But thanks for your question. We'll get him back, I'm sure.
There you go.
There we are. Super. Sorry about that.
I will never install beta software. It just drops the mic in the background. It's just weird. I'm watching it. I'm trying to keep an eye on it. Sorry about that, everyone. Right, Chris, I heard your question. You've got two parts to that. Chris, you're not under Ofcom license rules. So you can swear, you can say what you like. It's your audience. But what you are under is commercial license rules. So if you put music into your podcast that's commercially licensed, you will need a PRS license from the PPR. And they cost £231 plus VAT for 1 year to use in your podcast. And unfortunately, I'm sorry to tell you, even if you get that license, it won't work everywhere. So the American licensing, so if your podcast then is then put onto Facebook, Facebook just blocks it. It doesn't care whether you've got a license or you haven't got a license. It doesn't know. And so it just assumes that you've played copyright music and it just mutes the whole podcast. So you can't do anything. If you've got your podcast with copyright music in the UK, then you can put it out onto your website. You can put it out. And if somebody comes after you, you show them your license and you're safe. There is one other platform that you can use. It's called Mixcloud. And if you go to Mixcloud and create a account, you can push your podcast there with any music in it, and Mixcloud sort out your licensing copyright issues for you. So as part of your membership on Mixcloud, they will deal with the copyright. So say what you like on your podcast, it's yours. Obviously, your audience will then decide whether they want to listen to whatever you've got to say. But secondly, with commercial music, there are many, many sites you can download commercial music from or rip from if you want to, or upload. And again, I would suggest Mixcloud may be your output for it, because the social media sites will block it, because suddenly there's too many different licensing bodies around the world and they haven't got together. Andrea.
Super. Sam, sorry, Sam, can I just a follow on from that before we go to Andrea? What about, the things like you mentioned that it's not under Ofcom, so you don't have to worry about Ofcom regulations and stuff. But what about slander? That's a question being asked there. Is there a grey area there? I mean, I guess if you slander somebody, you can get done wherever you say it.
Yeah, it's slander is slander is slander.
Yeah,
you can't slander someone just because it's a podcast and not under Ofcom. If somebody gets a recorded copy of what you slandered them on and chooses to take you to court, then you will potentially lose if the slander is correct.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Super. Andrea, did you have a question there? Unmute yourself if you can.
Yes. Hello. Hi, Sam. Thank you very much. This is brilliant. It's two really, but the first one's a quick one because I missed it. You said about having a movement thing. Meerkats.
Yeah. So Headliner.app is a platform I use, but Descript has got an audiogram creator as well. So for your audiogram, all I'm suggesting is you create a graphic, whatever it may be. Mine is the guest. So I have a graphic of my guest. I then have their title. And then I just have a little moving like audio bar. And all it does is it just makes that, we all do it, put ourselves on the other side of the fence. We're going down our Facebook stream or our LinkedIn stream or Twitter stream, and it's dull as ditch water most of the time. It's wordy, which is why most people like Instagram more these days, because it's just a graphic image. But if you can make that graphic image move even a fraction, So there is a platform I'm using now, if you want to try it, called canva.com.
I've
And
heard of it.
canva.com, I spent years trying to learn Photoshop and I failed. It's just too complex, too difficult, and it just wasted my time. I went on to
Right.
canva.com. They've got great little templates. So it's a bit like using PowerPoint. I want this template that fits for Instagram, or I want this template, and they're predefined templates that you can change the colors, change the text, throw a few more words in, and ship them out. So canva.com is great for creating little graphics as well.
Brilliant, thank you. That's great. And the second one was, how do you interview people across Zoom, or do you actually have them in the room with you, or both?
Both. So pre-COVID, I would interview them in the radio station, and that was great. And I'd save the recorded radio station interview and then push that out. But distance is the one thing as well. If you've got, for me, I'm starting to interview people further afield in America, Australia. Clearly, they're not going to do one-on-one with me. If you've got them locally to you, then maybe you want to do them face-to-face. But actually, it makes it harder doing face-to-face, because you then have to get a second mic set up somewhere where you are. Whereas, Zoom is doing all that lifting for you. They're doing the recording, the storage of the MP3. Yeah, personally, right now, I'm much happier recording at a distance.
Right, okay. Working well for you.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Andrea. Okay, any other questions? Anybody else want to give us a wave and ask Sam something? Well, actually, no, I'm going to stop it there for the moment, because we haven't even spoken about monetization yet, and we are running out of time. Okay. So can we move on to that now? Because we can make a few quid. Come on.
Okay, monetization. There are ways of doing it. The first one is there's a platform called Patreon. You could go to Patreon, and it's basically saying to your listeners, look, hey, if you've enjoyed this podcast, click this button and give me some money. It doesn't really work. I'm sorry to say. I mean, you'll spend hours begging. It's like standing outside, busking and putting your bowl out at the end and saying, look, as you're passing me by, chuck a $5 in, would you? Give me a coffee. I don't recommend it. There are many platforms now, like Spotify are beginning to do it, Simplecast are doing it, others are doing it, where they will inject an ad into your podcast for you. So you license your podcast to them, and they will throw any ad into your podcast. Again, I don't particularly like that, because I have no control. So I don't know what ad they're going to put into my podcast and where in my podcast they're going to put it either, because they can stop it at any point. Look, we've all seen it. If you've seen a YouTube video and you're watching it, halfway in the video, suddenly someone throws an ad in from Google, and you go, that's just the wrong place to throw it in. So I don't personally recommend that. What I would say, if you want to monetize your podcast, is find a sponsor. I'm fortunate. I've now got 5 sponsors for my podcast, and I rotate those. But everyone should be able to find somebody who's got a sponsorship goal that they would want to be aligned with your podcast. So once you've defined what your podcast's about, and you've got your audience, and you've grown your audience, then actually going and thinking, well, okay, which company would benefit from being aligned with me? Now, in the old days, I say the old days, we're only talking 10 years ago, PR agents would look for magazines to go and put ads into, because, the ad would be aligned to the audience. Then we had blogging, and that was very similar. And now in podcasting, it's exactly the same. You just need to find who your potential business partner could be. And the way that I started mine was not asking for money. Sometimes the hardest thing is to go to somebody and say, look, hey, I've got 100 people who listen to my podcast, or 1,000, whatever number it is, right? And I want some money. That's what I want. Will you pay me? And then you go, how much do I charge? You go, £100, £1,000. You don't know right now. I went away and decided that the first 3 or 4 podcast sponsors I wanted were going to do me a barter deal. So I will do X for you, which is put your company brand in my pre-roll or my post-roll or in my mid-roll, somewhere in my podcast. And in exchange, you will let me use your platform for free, or you'll let me use your software for free, or you'll let me, whatever it may be, whoever you've identified as your partner. And that way you start to break the cycle. And it's a very silly thing, but once one brand advertiser sees that another brand is associated to your podcast, strangely, they don't feel so, they're not the first down the tracks. So they feel that actually the second podcast advertiser might pay you, and the third one might pay you because the first one, and you never need to tell them that the first one was a barter deal. So it's no one likes to be the first person down the track. So let me try to explain that clearer, maybe. For me, it was difficult to go and ask for money when I wasn't sure that my audience was big enough or I would give enough value back. So I did barter deals. But now I'm very comfortable that my audience is significantly large enough and I am adding value back to the brand partner that I've identified. And therefore, I can ask them for money.
Super. Was that a question that somebody had asked, or had I asked that?
You asked that, Brian.
I completely lost it. Do you know what I'm doing, Sam? Sorry. I'm doing all sorts of things. I'm reading all these things in the comments there, and then all of a sudden I think, did I ask that question or somebody else? Okay, so there's the first thing then, is there's a number of those platforms. Have we got those up? So Buy Me a Coffee and a Patreon, and then those barter deals that just start off before you can ask or perhaps feel comfortable for that. With those barter deals or with those sponsorship deals, you just approach the company, whatever you think might work on your thing. You just send them an email or something.
Yeah, look, hey, I've got a podcast. It's aligned. I've researched your company. I think it's aligned to your audience. Would you be interested? Guaranteed they're going to listen to your podcast, so it better be good. And at the end of the day, they will then make a judgment call, and it is a pure judgment call whether they want to be aligned to your podcast as well. So it's a two-way relationship.
Yeah, and you also mentioned about, when you've got a decent audience to actually offer that sort of sponsorship. What would you say that number is? I mean, again, it's how long's a piece of string? Are you talking about 1,000? Are you talking about 500? Or
the number can be any, because 100 engaged people in a vertical are better than 1 million people not engaged.
Right. So if you've got 100 people who are into, I don't know, sausage dogs, if you sell sausage dogs or sausage dog T-shirts, that company may well be interested in that.
Each one of those listeners may be worth £10 or £100 or £1,000 to that.
Your sound's gone again, Sam. Sorry. Yeah.
There you go. I'm back. So each one of those customers has a value. If in marketing terms, we look to customer acquisition cost and what is that customer worth to them. So insurance companies, I think, will say, a new insurance customer is worth £10 to them because they're going to spend maybe £1,000. So you just got to say it's not the number of listeners, because it's called the long tail. Joe Rogan's got millions up here, but most of those people aren't actually of high value. They're just listeners. They're young boys in the room listening to MMA stories, right? Or whatever he might be interviewing. Elon Musk smoking a spliff. There's no real value to it. But you might find that you've got a highly engaged audience that is targeted for a particular company, as you said, who are going, Jesus, we haven't acquired those customers through a normal channel. Podcasting is the new channel for customer acquisition.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, very, very good. Okay, well, listen, we are fastly run out of our time. So if anybody has got a question, let's go to the actual videos and take some quick questions. If you've got another 5 minutes, Sam, that would be super if that's okay. Anybody got a question? Give us a wave. Go to the chat. Oh, Christ, loads of them. Okay, so Ryan, I saw you first. I'll unmute yourself if you can.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Sam. It's been a brilliant insight into a lot of this.
Pleasure.
Just a quick a curiosity about, obviously, as well when you're just starting off and you might have a very low budget, but even when you grow, is there, I suppose, any expectation of like monetary remuneration for the guests that you might have on the podcast? Or is it like a mutual understanding that, them on the podcast gives them a platform to potentially advertise their work as well?
Oh, I shook my head and I shouldn't have actually. Apology. No, all of my guests on my technology show, I pay zero. Okay. They're there because I have a platform they want to reach out to. They're an audience that I have, etc. When I did the podcast festival during COVID, I had Cara Swisher, I had George the Poet. They're big names. And to help me sell tickets, because I was making money selling tickets to this podcast festival, it was only right that they would be paid as speakers for their time. But that's a very different to a podcast itself. Now, maybe down the road, I might find a guest go, oh, I hear, Sam, you got sponsors and you're making money from this. I'd like a little chunk of change back. I might then decide not to have them as a guest, or I might decide, yeah, you're a great guest. I'll give you a little bit of, whatever. But my immediate answer is no. Don't set an expectation on payment at all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Nice one. Sam, quickly though, mashup.events is something that you're running, is one of your sites. Tell us quickly about that, and let's get everybody to go there and have a look at it and get some examples of how to do it.
Okay, mashup.events is basically a free site, free podcast event that I do once a month. The one we're doing next is with a guy called Charlie Cadbury. It's all about voice commerce. So if you've got an Alexa or a Google Home and you're looking at a business, we're going to talk about, from a business angle, why you should be having a branded voice assistant skill, and then how you make money from it, and then exactly where this whole market's going. So a good example is the NSPCC have partnered with Global Radio. So the ad will then detect whether you've got a smart speaker. If it detects you have a smart speaker, it will say at the end of the ad, would you like to donate £10? If you then, using your voice only, say yes, it will go to your Amazon Pay account and it will take the £10, and then Amazon will deal with the distribution of the money at the back. So that's great from a charity perspective, but now extend that further. Imagine you now hear an ad that says, would you like a lawnmower? Would you want your Domino's pizza? The technology that's been built by Charlie Cadbury allows you to detect down to postcode level the listener, and at the same time change the ad to specifically be, so for Domino's it might be, oh look, it's Domino's, and it goes, you're in SL6, you're in SL7. At the last minute the ad will say, this is your local Domino's pizza chain. So we're doing a whole session. It's about half an hour, 45 minutes with Q&A at the end on voice commerce and frictional voice commerce. Please join us if you can, if it's an interest area for you.
Super. Yeah, that link is in the chat there, guys. Mashup.events. If you if you want to take a look at that. So super stuff. Have we got time for one more question? Sorry, Sam.
What platform do you record your podcasts and how can you get them out there?
So I record them on Zoom, and then I edit them with Descript to make them sound better and tighten them up.
Descript, is that
yeah, Descript.com.
Right, okay. Not heard that one before.
Yeah. Have a Abu, have a listen back. This will be up on YouTube, so we've covered a lot of that. If you go to tvtrainingacademy.com, go to the members area, you will see all the last webinars that we've done with all our experts, and you can listen to any of those again and find out all that information. But super. So any last question?
Susan's got one.
Susan. Okay, Susan, if you unmute yourself first before you ask it. There we go.
I'll unmute.
Super.
Right, if you're using your own music or a friend's music,
yeah,
are you still safer to have to buy a PRS license?
No. If you're using your own music or a friend's giving you permission to use their music, you don't need a license.
So you just need to make a note of, say, their code, the IRS code or whatever.
No, I mean, if it's a friend who's kindly giving you a musical tune that they've done themselves, then no, there's no requirement at all. You can just use that willy-nilly how you want. There's many sites online, if you want to Google it as well, which are license-free music. So you can go and find those as well. It's only if you've got some commercial licensed music that you're going to use. Look, 9 times out of 10, you're never going to get found out. Okay. And that's just an answer. If you wanted to use, there is something called safe harbor. Let me try and explain that very quickly. Safe harbor means if you wanted to use the intro jingle of a famous track for less than 30 seconds, you can do that without having to pay a license fee. But you go beyond 30 seconds, you get into a gray area where they could come after you and make you pay a royalty.
That's great. So you just need to know the parameters you can work within.
Yeah. And I'd say I've got a couple of intros that I've used with underlying beds, music beds, which are less than 30 seconds long, and I'm safe. But if I go to a full track or 3/4 of a track, you may have heard on BBC Radio 4 when they do Desert Island Discs, when they say the music track has been shortened for rights holders reasons. And that's because what they're saying is we're not paying a PRS license for this.
Okay. So anything under 30 seconds, I'm okay anyway.
30 seconds is pretty safe. Anything beyond that, you're in a grey area, and I'm not going to be there to bail you out.
Yes, I don't want to get into a you probably won't get found out situation. It's going to be safe.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like parking on yellow lines. You can do it, but don't do it.
As if I would. Okay, thank you.
Super. Thanks, Susie.
Thanks a lot.
Well, listen, thanks, guys. That is really all we have time for. So can we give Sam a massive thank you? Round of applause.
Thank you, Sam.
Really
Brilliant.
super advice. I could literally carry on talking to you for hours, Sam, because there's so much there. But thank you. I always do this just to put you on the spot. Will you come back and talk to us again sometime?
Of course I would, Brian. Yeah, no
Brilliant.
worries.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us. Now, listen, if you have got, I know a number of you have got podcasts or YouTube channels that you've set up. There's a great one on YouTube. It's called Same Again Barman. Naughty, naughty, very naughty. It's got a great little tag at the beginning done by somebody you might recognize. Go and have a look on YouTube, or go to the TV Training Academy members area. Go to the forum and share your social media platforms, share your podcasts, and let's support each other and build up that audience. Because honestly, getting it off the ground, the first 50, the first 100 is the hardest. So support each other, get that all going. So next week, I'm not sure what's happening next week, but keep an eye on the members area and you'll see we have got all sorts of stuff on tvtrainingacademy.com. If you want one-on-one help over Zoom and all the rest of it, do take a look. But once again, Sam, thank you. What an awesome a load of information. Really great. I'm writing down some of this stuff. I'm just wondering who's going to buy me a coffee if I get that thing. Who's going to get me a coffee?
Brian, if anyone wants to reach out to me with questions, I'm more than happy to take them. So Brian can share my email with you, and if you've got any questions, fire them at me. I'll do my best to answer them.
You're a gentleman. Okay, check out the members area. You're an absolute gentleman, Sam. Thanks for being with us, everybody. Thanks again to Sam. We'll see you next time. Stay safe. Cheers.
Thank you,
okay,
Brian.
guys.
Bye, guys.